Good morning. I would like to welcome all the panelists and the participants of today's webinar on continuous feedback versus performance appraisal. My name is Ram Kumar and I am the Product Development Director at Synergita. We have with here an eminent panel of speakers from various industries. Arvind Desi is a Group Talent Director at Towers Watson, and he has managed implementation of a very large talent development program at Aveva covering about 55,000 employees. Anga is a CEO at Global HR Solutions, and she has extensive experience as a consultant in the areas of human resource and employee relationships. Mitch is a Senior Human Resource Director at Healthcare Management covering HR processes for a dental company in Texas. He has got a very good experience in interviewing people, and he has also written a book about it. Lee Cooper is editor of intelligently-emotional.com. He is a consultant and has a very active blog where he writes about talent management and human resource issues. Today, the context of our webinar is a paradigm shift that is happening in the world of business, where it is no longer sufficient to just hire people for money. The business world is going through some very turbulent times. We need people who can deeply engage themselves in their jobs, innovate and collaborate across levels and functions. We need to inspire them. We need to invoke their passion. This requires continuous dialogue between the people and their organization, and so an annual performance appraisal is just not adequate. So we are going to talk about that and the need for continuous feedback and what is it. Is it very similar to the performance appraisal process, or is it different? How it has to be different? Can we leave that to the managers? Or should we bring in some accountability and structure to the process of continuous feedback? These are the issues that we are going to talk today. So I would like to now hand over the mic to the panelists. They can start with a 2-minute introduction to the context and the various topics and the points that we had talked about just now and has been put up in the webinar agenda. Over to the panelists, please.
Well, if I may, I'll go first. Is that all right?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I think this is an extremely timely topic. It's a new year, a new fiscal year for many companies, and at this time of year, especially in the United States, many companies are doing, or at least beginning the process of doing their annual performance appraisals. Unfortunately, this has become a time that is fraught with fear and ill feelings, both on the parts of the managers and the part of the employees, because each side comes to the table, comes to that discussion with a certain amount of apprehension. Employees tend to feel that no matter what I say, it's not going anywhere because my manager's opinion will prevail. The managers are often afraid to confront employees with concerns that they have had about performance over a period of time. And I have been subject to that myself. It's not a good feeling. If those discussions don't go well, then they can color the tone of interactions for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, the annual review or annual performance appraisal has become the norm for most companies. But my opinion is the job of a manager is to interact constantly, continuously, if you will, with their employees. Being called to the manager's office or having an appointment to speak with your manager for a performance appraisal or anything else should not be like being called to the principal's office. You shouldn't walk in with a feeling of dread, because anytime you go in there, you know you're going to get some sort of bad news. So I think that engaging in an interactive process continuously is necessary. The employment situation in the United States and most of the world today, or much of the world today, is a little bit depressed. And it's at this time of year when good employees start looking for other opportunities if they're not happy where they are. Many managers and executives make the mistake of thinking that employees will stay if you give them enough money. That's not the case. In Maslow's hierarchy, at the top of that triangle is self-actualization, which means that you have to, as a company, let that employee have some sort of fulfillment. And you won't be able to know how to fulfill or motivate an employee if you haven't spent the time and effort to get to know that individual. So that's my take on the topic. I think it's very, very, very timely, and I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, next, you can.
This is Mitch Byers. As I began to think about continuous feedback, I think in order to attract talent to an organization, somehow you've got to get the people's attention, and different organizations do it differently. Maybe they offer a sign-on bonus, maybe terrific benefits, maybe they have a great product line, or they have a mission and a set of values that really resonate with the marketplace. And I think then they're able to offer a role that, or maybe they're able to offer a role that where employees can travel to the corners of the universe. So I think, getting their attention is a great start, but then the next step is to how do we keep them? And I think to keep them, you really have to capture their hearts. And in over 50 years of research, it shows that consistently the number one need of employees is to have full appreciation for their work. And the number two need is for the employees to feel like they're in on things, that they understand why things are happening the way they are. And I feel if we sort of understand that and can grasp that, then we can look at continuous feedback. And I think when presented in a genuine and professional manner, this can be a conduit to deliver the appreciation. But it can also then greatly enhance this sense of connectiveness that employees really need. That's really what they're searching for. So I think there's this idea of continuous feedback is critical. And I really see where it could be more like sort of liver and onions or meat and potatoes, where you could have continuous feedback and performance appraisals, where those two could complement each other.
Hi everyone, we'll stick to the order that we gave our introduction to. This is Arvind. I couldn't agree more with the previous speakers. The way I've always thought about performance management is really, ideally, what we as a community of practitioners need to do is to shift it from being an HR bureaucracy or a semi-legalistic formality and to get it much more of an attitude that really engages both the individual and their line managers. And the overall theme of this webinar is something very close to my heart, and I know from reading Lee Cooper's blog just today that it's also close to his. I've always seen good performance management almost like an in-flight opportunity for course corrections. The destination should be clear, meaning that the individual is able to link their day-to-day work with the overall business priorities and the strategic objectives. And it's amazing how often people can be doing a job and can be doing work and working very hard, but they are unable to link their day-to-day to-do list with the overall aim of what their job is designed to do. And again, this is something that I learned very strongly, and it stayed with me ever since my branch management days in retail banking. And even having ordinary staff really understand how the business operates, how the business makes money, and crucially how their work links into that overall goal is really important. So that's the destination. And then what frequent conversation should be about is knowing how far the trajectory is deviating or from that overall path. And as we know from aeroplane in-flight course corrections, the plane spends most of its time off the flight path, but the crucial thing is it can get back onto it by measuring its position. And the point here is that the more frequently we check in, the more subtle those course corrections can be, and it's not something that you hear, after 6 months or at the end of the year when things really take you by surprise and there's a real shock. And this is where the partnership, and this is really down to the skill of line managers, is a crucial point in doing this well, but also the attitude of the individual themselves. So that would be my overall plea about good performance management.
And if I might just endorse first and foremost everything that all of the other panelists have said, I couldn't agree more. I think I looked at the context of the webinar and how we might, and the early point about the world of business going through challenging times. I think that we live in an incredibly scary time from a business perspective, in so much of so many of our traditional assumptions, processes, systems, models, ways of working are being challenged, and in many cases they're being ripped up and rewritten. And that is in itself, it's incredibly frightening for a lot of people, but it also creates enormous opportunity. Not only opportunity in terms of new business opportunities, but actually new opportunities in terms of how we work. And I think that changes are going to become increasingly evident with respect to how we work and where we work. I think as talent increases in demand and decreases in supply, that we're going to continue to experience a drive to more and more outsourcing, home working, work sharing, flexible working, remote working, multi-site, multicultural, cross-border global workforces. All of these kind of issues human resource professionals and business professionals are having to address. And I think that talent management, retention and development is going to be increasingly under spotlight from all corners of the organization. I think at the same time, another fundamental shift that we're going to see is that businesses are going to move away from measuring historically what I would define as presenteeism and hours as a measurement of performance in an organization, which seems incredibly archaic. And it's going to become more about measuring output and performance and value and contribution. And I think what you produce or contribute or add in terms of value to an organization is going to become more important than the hours that you might spend doing it. And I think that's a fundamental shift, and rightly so. So my sense is the very best people will want to work for organizations who encourage them to add value, who encourage them to collaborate, to innovate, to get deeply ingrained in the DNA of the organization. And in order that that might happen, a mix of positive performance appraisal as a formal process through which to recognize and develop, and continuous feedback as a kind of a daily exercise that is deeply ingrained in the culture of an organization is going to be business critical if organizations are going to perform in the kind of new world order. So I think performance appraisal, performance management, continuous feedback are going to become more firmly under the spotlight, and as I say, business critical if organizations are to thrive.
Okay, so let me also then move on to the next point in this topic is how do we now, having realized that continuous feedback is very important in today's world, how do we help the line of business managers? How does the HR or the management leadership team provide the necessary process or systemic framework within which the managers, the line of business managers, are able to engage with their team members on an ongoing basis, if not daily, at least weekly, if not weekly, at least once in a month? Can they sit at least once in a month with their team individually and spend 15 minutes trying to give some feedback, try to record some qualitative feedback, not just ratings, which eventually over a period of time accumulates into the eventual performance appraisal that are going to happen at the end of the year. So how can we leave it just to the initiative of the managers, or can an organization put in some kind of a process and a framework and some templates which the managers can use on a weekly or a monthly basis? And what is your experience in doing this in organizations?
You can't leave it completely to the discretion of the managers. I believe over a period of time we have seen that that doesn't work. It works better with some than with others, but some managers seem to be afraid to communicate with their employees. So I think we have to put in place not only accountability, but also tools to assist them with this. It's my feeling that we need both the formal performance appraisal as well as continuous feedback. The annual appraisal is what gives you leverage. It is something that you use to measure an employee's performance against previously defined goals and objectives. But continuous feedback is what you use to carve out the behaviors that are desired. No performance appraisal should ever be a surprise. Any employee should have an absolutely excellent idea of what is going to be communicated to them at that annual review period, because they have had guidance, they've had conversations, they've had meetings, whatever form of communication throughout the year to tell them, this is what I'm doing well, this is what I'm doing not so well, and this is what I need to change. So in order to make that happen, the leaders, the managers, the executives have to be held accountable, because they have other priorities, but their main priority is going to be guiding the behavior of their team members. Unfortunately, some of them won't do it unless there is some accountability at the end for them, whether that is reflected in their bonus or their own performance appraisal or promotional opportunities or not. Yet the pushback is going to be, I don't have time to talk to these people all the time. Therefore, we have to be, and I say we as HR people, we have to be proactive in providing them tools to make that easier. That might be some software program. It might be initiating a culture change that says you need to meet with your employees informally. Continuous feedback doesn't have to be a written documentation. It can be kudos on the job well done. It can be, are you feeling overwhelmed today? But the criticality can't be ignored. If you engage in continuous feedback, you have an opportunity to find out about issues that might affect not only the employee's performance, but overall the company's performance. Are you having issues that come up concerning FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, ADA? Is the employee suffering from some outside force that is going to affect job performance? And so the manager is tasked with not only managing functions, but also interacting and giving feedback continuously, and also accepting continuous feedback from the team members that are going to make that happen.
I really like how she laid that out, especially the part about the accountability and the tools. And from my perspective, I think it should be HR architected and then driven at the line level. It's really up to us, I think, to, first of all, get the buy-in at the executive level. We really need their support, and then be the catalyst for generating program ideas. You know, what's going to be the best software, what's going to be the best tools. I think HR needs to, if the company's large enough and has a training department, get their input. Trainers are very good about helping see what's ahead as far as what are the stumbling blocks of moving from an employee from point A to point B. You know, get their insights, and then, again, if it's a large enough organization, run a pilot program with the sort of the most likely suspects, if you will, the people that you feel will do the best. You know, sort of handpick the managers and get them involved. And I think then if you can get some traction, and then it can be spread throughout the organization from there. But I think there has to be a certain amount of accountability, and that accountability, as far as back on the managers, that could be part of their, if you will, annual review. How much have they provided as far as continuous feedback? And if you tie some money to that as far as a bonus, anything like that, I think you're going to see an increase in activity in this area.
Thanks, Mitch. I would really urge a way of leveraging the busyness that all line managers have in a very positive way, because making this process work well is actually being very respectful of line managers' time, and the message has to be, look, doing this well will make it far easier for you to complete the formal process that might happen once a year, in many organizations twice a year. But making that really, really easy for you is various mechanisms and an online, regular update, which will take seconds of your time. If it's an easy-to-access system, will make it far easier for you to complete the formality at the end of the year because you've been doing it little and often throughout the period. And also, as Angus said earlier, that this reduces the likelihood of any surprises. But one of the things that I think is important for us as professionals to consider is why performance appraisal gets such a bad name. And I have a strong belief that the foundation of performance appraisal is often wrong, in that roles haven't been graded often properly. Is the right work being done at the right level? Are the right competencies have been clearly enough defined? And at the back end of that, are line managers really skilled in differentiating performance so that the compensation and reward can be done in a really fair, open, honest and transparent way? These are all the things that give performance management a really bad name, but fixing them, thankfully, we believe is relatively easy to do, and B, can solve a lot of problems downstream. And really this thing about setting the right objectives right from the outset, making sure that the right work is done at the right level, is really, I think there are 4 questions that sum this up, that the individual should be absolutely crystal clear, firstly, on what to do. Secondly, they know how to do it. Thirdly, they have the ability to do it. And crucially, number 4, they have the desire to do it. And these 4 key questions, I think, should be the basis of regular conversations. And really, our role is upskilling line managers to have both the confidence and the confidence to know that this conversation can happen relatively quickly, relatively easy. Really, in a matter of minutes, you can gather very, very valuable information about the individual. Have some mechanism of recording that, just as in the means of a regular update, so that means at the end of the year there isn't a huge onerous task for a long list of direct reports.
I think that where HR professionals can help with help managers with continuous feedback is providing the tools and resources and information to enable that process, that continuous feedback process, to actually start from almost pre-hire. Because I actually think the process of continuous feedback should start as an integral part of the recruitment process before you even bring someone into an organisation. I think, how many times have, if you start with the communication of the organisation's goals, mission, vision, values, how consistently are they applied throughout the organisation at every level? How regularly are they communicated internally and externally? Are they on every message that the organisation puts out internally and externally? And if that's very much an integral part of the recruitment process, those messages, then an employee is almost under no illusions as to why they are in an organisation, what their responsibilities are, what their goals, objectives are. Before they even come in, they can make a decision before the hire is actually made as to whether that organisation's ambitions, visions, values, goals are consistent with their own. The two are very much aligned. So I think that as HR professionals, we can encourage line managers from recruiting to communicate expectations, deliverables, goals, milestones within the role for which they are hiring to the individual that they potentially may be hiring. That we encourage them to contribute, to communicate to the individual how they will contribute to the broader goals of the organisation and why, and that we communicate that message relentlessly, both formally and informally, throughout the hiring process, the onboarding process, the induction process, the first 90 days. So I think as HR professionals, if we encourage a culture of continuous feedback in the organisation, and we start it from almost the minute, even before people come into the organisation, then I think that can be a very positive message. And the other thing I think that we can really help with is, frankly, to start with ourselves. Start with ourselves, with our colleagues, with our own teams. Maybe keep a record, or start to look at ways of how we can measure the impact that continuous feedback is having on performance within our own teams. If we can start to give line managers tangible examples of the positive impact continuous feedback is having in our area of the business, and ultimately on performance and productivity and on P&L, then my sense is that they will start to sit up and take notice. If they see other teams increasing productivity and profitability, and they see other peers within the organisation asking how that happened, then my sense is that's going to have a very positive impact on how continuous feedback is perceived in the organisation. But I think a lot of that is recognising or encouraging line managers not to see feedback and appraisal as something they've just got to get done in order that they can get back to the day job. I think it's about encouraging managers to realise that their stock rises or falls on the performance of their people and those people that they're working with. And I think if we encourage that culturally from the onset of the hiring process, then we start to see that culture permeate throughout the business.
Okay. So the third point today that I want to discuss is about the role of templates, and we see a lot of organizations have tried to use IT tools more to automate their existing processes or existing approaches to creating templates for performance appraisal, which is generally they try to generalize it across the organization. Very little customization is done at the role level or at the department level, but when it gets to continuous, this is at the performance appraisal level. When it goes to the continuous feedback level, we often find that these templates have to be customized to the individual level, because each individual is unique, his strengths and aspirations are unique, and when you are going to engage with him in terms of planning his career and having a dialogue with him, it is not enough that we have a standard template that is defined across the entire division or an entire role, but which can be customized further in terms of tasks, in terms of KRAs, in terms of goals, in terms of individual interest areas that person has, which the current role is not fully utilizing, or there are certain areas that the role is expecting from him, but this person is not interested in that particular skill area, for example. So some of these things are highly customized or unique to each individual. So even though today we know the technology, if really designed well, can help a lot in terms of making this very, very personalized for every individual, most IT systems are not designed ground up, keeping the individual in mind. It is always automation of an existing process. So what do you think is the right approach in marrying technology and this flexibilities that is required on the ground by the line managers, and how we can do that to give them easy to use tools which are very personalized at the individual level?
If I could kick off there, Salvinder, just to comment on that specific level. I think one of the dangers of automating processes initially is that people over-rely on the automated process of the system, and I think it's really crucial that we reinforce the need for dialogue, and that does mean the face-to-face conversation. For those of you who remember in the early days of email making a mark in the world of work, that I know it's still the case in many organizations, people would send emails left, right and center even when a person was sitting next to them in the office. And I think this is where we have to be really careful that people don't use the system as an excuse to diminish their dialogue, because I think a lot of the points that you just raised, Ram, are much better addressed through an open and honest conversation, human being to human being, rather than simply updating comments on a system. Both have to be done. The system is about reducing the bureaucracy and the paperwork and making it nice and easy to report, to be able to see that the process is being followed, but it shouldn't be a substitute for dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you very much. Yeah, it should be a tool just to note down and refer it back maybe after a year or two and see the growth of the person rather than the end in itself.
I
Just to follow up on that, I think if it's anytime you're trying to personalize something, it's really that's people to people. And I think that the superior way of doing that is just in person. That being said, I want to comment on something that was said earlier about behaviors and competencies. I really think that is truly the thrust of the organization needs to identify what are those competencies for that superior performer and then build some sort of feedback mechanism around those. And that can be a formal tool or it can just be ongoing. But I think if the individual that's being brought into the organization understands what those behaviors are and then they're constantly getting feedback on those, I can't help but think that you're giving them the greatest chance to participate at the very highest level that they can within that organization. And so I really think it really begins back, with those and then build the mechanisms around the competency. So I think it should be individualized, and not so much on the individual, but on the correct behaviors.
I agree with both previous speakers. I think any system to be effective is going to have to be customizable to a certain extent, whether it's to level or function. But let me piggyback upon the other speakers' comments regarding email. We live in a world of social media, and unfortunately, some of the tools that have been developed to ease and expand communication seems to have exactly the opposite effect. So yes, even today, people would sit there and email someone who is right across the cubicle from them, and that impedes communication rather than enhancing it. So we do have to be very careful with a software system or a communication system that is internet-based, because it can become a crutch. For those managers whose natural inclination is to not communicate face-to-face or by phone if they can't communicate face-to-face, then that could easily become a crutch for them. Well, I'll just shoot him an email and then that's done. I think it's a valuable tool to keep up with how employees have progressed throughout the year. As I said, there should be no surprises. And sometimes a year can be a very long time. So when you're doing an annual performance appraisal, there will inevitably be snafus and accomplishments that have been forgotten over the previous 12 months. And this can be a very helpful tool. You shoot this person an email regarding a specific action or behavior, and you can go back and review that when the time comes to actually formalize a document. However, this can never take the place of face-to-face communication or meetings. And I think that has to be very carefully introduced into a company. It's going to be a matter of training, and that's where HR, the day-to-day use of this will be operations-based, but the oversight, I believe, will have to come from the HR side to make sure that managers are trained. Companies frequently promote managers based upon their expertise at a certain thing, manufacturing widgets, for instance, and they fail to give them the training on how to manage and interact with people. That is a huge mistake. And so developing or implementing a continuous feedback system is an opportunity for the HR function in an organization to either build in or to reinforce those communication skills that may not have been reinforced in the beginning. So I think they have to go hand in hand in order for it to be effective.
I think that HR professionals can offer some consistency to the process. They can set the parameters. They can set organization-wide parameters and guidelines based on the overall objectives of the company, based on the mission, vision, values, and goals of the organization. I think that that's where sort of organization-wide common template that was referred to on the agenda, I think that could be, it should be influenced and certainly put together by, I guess, by all areas of the business, but certainly heavily influenced by HR. But just to endorse what everyone else has said, I think that it's really important that we don't have this one-size-fits-all approach to people, where we're also distinctly different, and we all have so many different kind of drivers and needs and motivations and reasons for being at work, I think it's really important that that's recognised, and fundamentally that's addressed in face-to-face conversation. And I think anything that can encourage that has got to be applauded.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I think we will now look at any questions that have come from the audience. Meanwhile, I would also want, Devsana, can you just look at that and keep them ready? Meanwhile, I want to share one of the experiences of one of the organizations where we are implementing Synergita currently, is that they have an annual system, but they wanted to do a continuous feedback. So what they do is a very, very simple tool that is used for making notes, just making notes qualitatively on a monthly basis, which is stored against a particular person, which is customized for the person. The emphasis on the face-to-face dialogue, the across the table meeting actually that happens between the manager and the person, which is reminder to the manager. The system reminds him that it is due, for example, but the actual meeting happens on a face-to-face basis, and then the notes are made across the table. The system being used only as a substitute for a notebook, which can be easily recalled later. And then at the end of the year, all these feedbacks that have been given and discussed is available at a click of a button, which they can review back and then use it for the normal performance appraisal process. So this is a balance between the use of tool versus the need for face-to-face dialogue that is being tried out in one of the organizations where Synergita is being implemented. Now, Devsana, is there any questions? You can read them out one by one.
No, Ram, I don't think so there are any questions.
Okay, so I will also request at this point in time the audience to type any questions they may have for the panelists in the questions window or in the chat window, so that we can ask the panelists to answer them. And while that is happening, I will also want all the panelists to give their summary view, more from the point of view of how do we bring in this cultural change. It's always a debate between whether it should be enforced through systems and processes, or it has to be a very subtle cultural change, or it has to be a combination of both. So how do we move from a HR-driven performance appraisal culture to a business-driven continuous feedback culture? So your final take on that while the audience types their questions.
My thought on that is, what you said earlier is how do you infuse it into the culture? And I think that just needs to be thought through very carefully with a lot of voices participating, because obviously we're trying to affect the entire organization. So I would say first get lots of folks involved in how we can think through this and refine it and roll it out. And again, I think going back to the competencies, that's where it needs to begin. And then we need to say, what is our end goal, and sort of keep that in mind. And then what are the iterative steps to getting there? I think with any organization, if you're trying to move it forward with a significant initiative, we've got to crawl before we can walk, and we have to walk before we can run. But I feel like if there's a plan in place with buy-in at the highest level, and then with as many people moving in that direction, I just think the organization can be quite effective in this area.
I agree. I think it's going to be HR's task to obtain executive acquiescence or agreement on this, and I think these types of initiatives have to be driven from the top down, because what is going to be required is a culture shift, a paradigm shift, and that's not easy. It's like turning a cruise ship. You don't turn that in a small circle or very fast. There will be pushback if there is accountability from the top levels, then of course the managers all the way to line managers will go along with it, but it has to be an enthusiastic buy-in from the executive level. And I think it is going to be incumbent upon HR to really sell the benefits of this. And so it's not just seen as another, oh, here's another HR touchy-feely thing. We will have to actually research and put together a business plan and a communication piece to the executives that will let them know why this will benefit the organization and the financial side of the organization, especially overall. So you hold the managers accountable, but the executives will be tasked with helping to drive the culture change.
And just to build on that, one of the things that I think really helps HR professionals make their case is the ability to speak with quantitative numerical data, which historically is something that the function has not done well. And this is where analysis and industry comparisons, particularly of reward and compensation, are absolutely essential. One of the biggest frustrations that top executives have with performance management is the lack of differentiation, and that stems right back to poorly set objectives. It quite often has a line manager skill element to it. As we all know, there are many line managers who are either unwilling or unable to tackle underperformance, and so you get a central tendency. But having the data analytics with a partner, and typically the only way you're able to convince top leadership if you're able to show them data from other companies within the sector or cross-sector, to be able to say, look, this is how we compare. If we think we're doing really, really well as a business, here's how that compares with the distribution of performance ratings within the company. How does that compare outside of the company? And this, I think, is a really crucial step in getting the attention of top leadership in organizations, so it doesn't seem like an HR in isolation, an HR program, but a business-led program, a strategy-led program that will really help the organization achieve its strategic objectives.
Harvinder, it's Lee here. I just wanted, as part of what, absolutely agree with what you were just saying. Do you get a sense that we will see a focus on HR becoming, evolving to become a profit center, or perceived as a profit center, a net contributor to bottom line in the business, as opposed to, and it's a subtle shift, but perhaps one that was historically considered to be a cost center, that actually increasingly the metrics around performance, recruiting, hiring, realization of goals and objectives, all of those kind of things will start to increasingly use technology and tools to be able to evidence how HR is contributing to the profitability and success of the organization.
Absolutely agree. I think you've hit the nail right on the head, Lee. The historical role of HR has been too much on the side of trying to influence through opinions and belief alone. And I think the future lies in us as a profession having the right data to say, to talk in the language of a CEO or a CFO, which is business performance, but crucially we have to say to them, well, where does business performance come from? And I've always believed that it comes from the focus on two things, and the ratio should be 40-20, 40% of our time, energy and effort on customers, 40% of our time, energy and effort on the talent, that's all of our people, produces the 20% of our time, energy and effort which should be on business performance as results. If it's any more than 20% on business performance and results, it's the equivalent of driving a car by solely looking through the rearview mirror. Because business performance by their very nature is historical. Looking forward, having that forward view, is all about customers and all about the talent. And as you said, and all of our co-panelists said, the industries of the future are going to be the knowledge economy, and the focus on the talent, meaning the entire workforce, is where we need to have really, really crystal clear, comparable data at our fingertips about job grading, job levels, competencies, and compensation to be able to really influence with credibility and authority.
Yeah. I agree. I think we share a similar view in that respect.
Okay, we have a question here from one of the audience, Caroline, I think, and it says, let me read out the question. With the general perception that the effort associated with the 360-degree evaluation and the stress of doing all the annual reviews at once during a busy business season is not worth the return, who is doing something radical and what is it? Anybody wants to take that question?
I am aware of some companies, or have been at least in the past aware of some companies who don't do an annual performance appraisal all at one time. They do it on the employee's anniversary year. So it spreads it out. And that seems to be effective. The managers can find themselves in the spot of doing appraisals constantly, but at least there's not that once-a-year time crunch that stresses everyone out. Also, I think it's very effective. In fact, I think it's more effective if performance appraisals are not tied to compensation, because then it becomes less emotional for everyone involved. You are actually reviewing and commenting on the employee's actual job performance, and they don't have the tension and the emotion and sometimes the animosity that comes with having to fight for a rating because they know it's going to directly affect their compensation. But that's not how it happens in most companies. Most of the time, that review, that performance appraisal is tied directly to their compensation. So you get your performance appraisal in January, and, you know, second week in February, you get your new pay rate.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Certainly reviews could be annual. Some companies are doing them just once a year. One thing you could also consider is, you know, group them in quarters. So do them four times a year and spread them out so that they are, you know, focused. The manager can spend some time on them, but they're not overwhelmed with all of their employees.
Yeah, I used to, that was a battle I fought in many organizations as well, to sort of decouple the mental association that people have with performance management and compensation. I absolutely take your point. The reality I've found is that however much you battle against it, it is the reality, and more of my focus in the companies I've worked at and now advising clients is to sort of embrace that reality, but make sure it's done well and fairly, and address the key issues, which tend to be one of the line manager's skill, and as I said, competency and objective setting, to ensure that good differentiation can happen. Because as we all know, one of the factors that disengages a workforce is where they feel that those who are going the extra mile and pulling their weight are being rewarded in exactly the same way as others in a team who perhaps aren't. And as well as personal recognition and appreciation, which I think Mitch mentioned is a crucial driver for engagement. People want to know that, you know, that they are being rewarded appropriately for the effort that they are putting in. But doing that right should be the focus of our attention, rather than saying, my opinion is, rather than saying let's just have the two separate somehow.
Yeah, I think I would also want to add to that and say that, see, you can't really avoid the performance appraisal and the associated linkages to the compensation and rewards, but that is where I believe that continuous feedback and performance appraisal have to be complementary to each other, where if you do only the performance appraisal, then you have all these negative things associated with that, but there is no engagement happening with the employee. If you do only continuous feedback, which is not very structured, and then you can't really, this is a practical business world and it has to be measured, it has to be linked to rewards. So the ideal combination will be to have a round-the-year continuous feedback process, maybe mandated once a quarter, once a month, it is the organization's choice, and then have a template which is more towards I think the templates are generally skewed towards what the organization expects from individuals as far as the performance appraisal is concerned, which is fine. We will do it once a year. But this monthly feedback thing should also include what the individual expects from the organization. So this template can be a lot more flexible and open and more adapted for face-to-face feedback, which is done throughout the year, maybe 10 or 12 or 4 times or 6 times a year. And that gives the comfort and the engagement with the employee, so that at the end of the year, you have a more holistic view of all that has happened in terms of discussion. And finally, when you go to the actual performance appraisal template, you do that little more professionally, keeping in view all this information that you have accumulated and recorded over a period of time, and then take it to the rewards and compensation. Then it gives a very balanced approach to both what the organization expects from the employee and the employee expects from the organization. Hello? Am I audible still?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's so let's I think we are approaching the end of the time for this webinar. So I would request all the panelists to give their last 30 seconds summary point, and then we will thank all the audiences after that.
To summarize, it's my opinion that both performance appraisals and continuous feedback have their place and are necessary. One is to give a concrete and documentable tool to the organization for measuring employees' performance against a predefined set of objectives. The other is to leverage the talents, abilities, the skills, and the desires and interest of the employee to the best places in the organization. It's to help engage in the interactive process as well as to ease the performance appraisal process. It's good management. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's also excellent management, and I think maybe where organizations can really step up is to introduce this idea, if they do have some sort of formal management training, or if they don't, if it could be part of the orientation of managers, new managers, and but all this needs to be, all these ideas I think need to be fleshed out at each organization with timelines, and also, who's accountable for what, and it really needs to be well thought through. So I would just encourage organizations to get multiple people involved. I think many voices are better than a few, but I think my personal opinion is that both are needed. I think on the performance appraisals, that can really be a time where you could sit down and just to realign, make sure that the behaviors and activities are in line with the strategies, and then looking ahead, where's the company going, where's the department going, and then where are you going in relationship to those, and then they can also fold in more personal considerations, what are the goals we can agree on. So I think the performance appraisals can look backwards, but they can also be a point where you can begin to look forward as well. So I would encourage companies to have tools for both areas.
So the only point I would add in summary is that I think good performance management plays a crucial role in strategic deployment. Unfortunately, from my experience, strategic deployment seems to be something that actually a minority of organizations are really, really good at. That means top of the house, right to the frontline workers, people understand how their role contributes to what the organization as a whole is trying to achieve. The other key point I would raise is this importance of a really solid foundation of clarity of competencies. Clarity of job grading and job levels is really, really important. In so many organizations we see people unsure of the level of the work that they should be doing. Is the right person matched to the right level? And at the output side is this data and comparable information about cross-industry and cross-sector information about both performance and compensation.
I think the only thing I would add to that is that continuous feedback and performance appraisal, just to endorse what everyone else has said, they have a huge part to play. I would suggest they're going to become ever more business critical with the changes to working practices, where we work, how we work, what we do at work, what's expected of us at work. So I think that the crucial thing is going to be to ensure that any employee has absolute clarity of understanding as to the broader objectives of the organisation and how their objectives and their responsibility and their role is contributing to the realisation of those objectives. So the whole kind of why am I here piece is really nailed down and is crucial to engagement and great performance. So yeah, I think continuous feedback, performance appraisal, and any other mechanism that encourages communication amongst people in the organisation, positive communication, is to be encouraged.
Okay, so thank you all. Thank you very much for your time. And I would also like to thank all the participants of this webinar. We will be hosting shortly the video recording of this webinar in the next few days at our Synergita website. Please do share it with people who are not able to attend this webinar. And we are planning to repeat this webinar with a different set of panelists in February and in March with the same topic, but with a different set of people from different